Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Things We Don't Talk About. We are your hosts. I am Mark Daniel Amazni.
I'm Stephanie Webb. Today we are diving into one of the most controversial and misunderstood topics in American life, the right to defend oneself. It's a subject that lives at the crossroads of mortality, law, and personal survival. What are we really allowed to do when our safety is threatened? What about when the threat comes from someone in authority? And how does the law interpret these scenarios compared to what our natural rights demand? So this episode is for those who believe in individual liberty, but also believe in truth, and that means questioning the foundation of what we've been taught.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what really is self-defense? Okay, so if you look at that at its core, self-defense is the right to protect oneself from imminent harm. In most legal definitions, this means you got a couple things. So there's got to be an imminent threat. The response must be proportionate to the threat, and you cannot be the aggressor. So I actually looked up the definition of that word. Let me see if I can find it.
Aggressive.
Proportionality.
Proportionality. All right.
So what this means, proportionality in its simplest terms, is a relation between two quantities where the ratio is constant. So when I think about that, what that really means to me is it's like, so if I'm stuck in a room and then all of a sudden this room starts to fill with water, okay, that is a changing variable, okay? But if I'm just stuck in an empty room and there's nothing else going on, there really isn't a new variable to talk about. So if you equate the same thing to the right to defend oneself, if I have another person who's trying to attack me and that person slips and falls down and like breaks their leg and incapacitates themselves, this is no longer a self-defense situation. Like that's how I think about the word proportionality. And then also like you cannot be an aggressor. So this sounds simple, but with real world applications, it's anything but. You definitely have different laws that vary by state. We have to take different circumstances into account, like I just did. And then there's two major doctrines that really kind of take in and say, hey, do we have the right to use deadly force or do we not have the right to use deadly force? And this is what's called duty to retreat or stand your ground.
So duty to retreat is the idea that you must attempt to avoid conflict by escaping the situation. If safely possible before resorting to deadly force. This doctrine applies mostly outside your home. If you're in a state like New York, you have a duty to flee before fighting back. And then on the other hand, stand your ground. I feel like everybody has heard about this one. Yep. Stand your ground laws. Eliminates this requirement. If you are in a place you're legally allowed to be, you can meet force with force. So even deadly force. Without retreating, Florida is a well-known state of this example. It's the doctrine that came into public focus during the George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin case. If you all know about that, it's they had a conflict outside of George Zimmerman's house. George Zimmerman killing him. It was a big.
I was in high school when this was going on. This was like 2005. I mean, obviously we could look it up and give you the exact information. But this made headline news. This was all over the place, and I definitely can understand and see both sides of the story. From what I do remember of the case, I know it got a lot of national attention, and it really comes down to it's like if you're talking about a situation where one party is armed and the other party is not armed, do you have the same threat level? And I think that's what people are always going to try to say. It's like, well, if this person has a gun and this person does not have a gun, it's not an equitable situation. So how can you even say that the right to self-defense is necessary? Well, in this case, what it came down to is they were having an argument. They wound up having a physical altercation, and the fact that George Zimmerman was armed, he felt that his life was endangered and took Trayvon's life. It is a very unfortunate situation, And, you know, that's just what happened.
Yeah, but if you're more interested in learning about that, George
Does it,
Zimmerman
Trayvon Martin?
versus, yeah, Trayvon. Both doctrines aim to reduce unnecessary violence, but the implications are different. Duty to retreat can criminalize a person defending themselves, standing their ground can sometimes protect aggressors who escalate tension. It's a legal and moral paradox. Do you have the right to survive, or do you have the right to survive in a manner prescribed by the state?
You know, that's an excellent question, and I think the simple answer is yes. I think we all have the right to survive. It really comes down to the totality of circumstances, and you know, I don't want to find myself in a situation where I have to defend myself. I don't want to escalate situations to that point, but I always think about it. It's like, you know, in all, I think it was said best in the movie Roadhouse when Dalton said, "No one wins in a fight." And I think if we could just apply that logic to our everyday lives and saying, hey, yeah, I mean, I may have to fight one day. I guess that's why he carried around his medical records, just made it easier. But, you know, I don't want to fight anybody, but if I have to, then I'm going to make sure that there's a darn good reason. You know, I want it to be, you know, because I just don't want to put myself in that situation.
Right, because if you're an aggressor, now all of a sudden that's not self-defense. Now
Right.
you're starting it. Now you're, you know, getting after somebody, and they have to protect themselves. So you want to be on the right side of that coin.
And you know, I do want to mention this really quickly. So before we continue on, I saw a report not too long ago where there was 3 burglars trying to break into a house. This was in the United States, and a person fired their weapon from inside the house outside. And I think at least 2 of the 3 burglars were hit with rounds or buckshot or something like that. I don't believe any of them died. And the burglars are suing the homeowner for defending his home. And I think about this and I go, man, y'all were trying to break into his house and steal stuff, and somehow you feel you have legal standing to sue when you were trying to break into someone's house and they shot you. It doesn't matter that they shot you from inside the house. Like, y'all were trying to break into the house.
Sounds like grounds for summary judgment.
Like, yeah, absolutely. So when you defend yourself against other civilians, most states apply one of these 2 doctrines, and one is called the Castle Doctrine. So let's look that up really quickly. Here we go. Got too many tabs open. Sorry. The Castle Doctrine, also known as the Castle Rule, or stand your ground in some states, is a legal principle that allows individuals to use deadly force in self-defense without a duty to retreat. When inside their own home, and sometimes other places they have the right to do this as well, against an intruder. In California, the Castle Doctrine is codified as such, Penal Code 198.5 PC. So in a sense, it's basically, you know, this is my castle. I have the right to defend myself. I have the right to defend my family. And I have the right to just make sure that we can protect ourselves, you know. So when I think about that same situation I was just describing, when we have people trying to do this, trying to break into someone's house, and it's like, of course I would meet that with force. Like, I don't know about anybody who's watching this, but if someone is trying to break into your house, this is not the time to have a debate or a discussion. Okay, like, there's nothing wrong with yelling out, hey, what's going on? Who are you? Or something like this. But if you're legitimately like in fear that this could be happening to you, I would strongly advise having a weapon, whether that's a firearm or a golf club or a baseball bat, and, you know, come in like excited and like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah. Otherwise, it's like you're gonna have to wait for the police, and I don't know if y'all have called the police lately,
Yeah.
but it takes forever for them to show up at your house anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're gonna ask
Or-
Mr. Robert to just not do anything while you're waiting for the police to arrive.
yeah, that's your alternative. So, you know, I think that's what makes this a controversial topic that people just don't talk about, because, you know, what does self-defense really mean to you, and how do you keep your house safe with all of your young ones sleeping underneath the roof when anyone could want to come into your house and steal your stuff or hurt you or harm you or hurt your family.
And at the same time, when you take a look at the 22 retreat, if you could make the same argument inside your own home. You could make the same argument outside of your home. If I have the ability to safely escape the situation or escape the situation with minimal harm, then it absolutely makes more sense for me to escape that situation than it would be to stand and, duke it out with somebody. Or potentially, like, what if they have a weapon? What if somebody has a knife and it's like, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and just run away from you. Like, let's, now I'm going to get my sprinting shoes on. My Lamborghinis are going to take me somewhere, I'll tell you that much. So what some of the uncomfortable truths about this is statistics show self-defense claims by racial or economic groups are more likely to be dismissed, criminalized, or denied in court. The legal principle may be universal, but the application is often not. And I think that when we start trying to muddy up the situation with was this person black, was this person Hispanic, was this person female, was like when you start really factoring all of that in, I think you have to, it matters, but it doesn't matter to the point of what are the totality of the circumstances. I can't say that it's like a man can't defend himself because a woman is hitting him. I don't hit women, but at the end of the day, if a woman is hitting me, do I just have to sit there and take it because a woman is hitting me? Or do I have the right to defend myself?
Right, especially if she's really punching you in the face and like making you bleed and
yeah.
How much are you supposed to take of that?
Right.
Strong arm somebody only works so much. So
yeah.
It's like, all right, how can I actually get away from this situation? Is it punching everyone in the face and running? What I have to do to stop her from punching me in the face? Like,
it's just
it all depends on the situation, right? But like escalation is always preached, and the police department used to preach that a lot. How can we just de-escalate situations? And I feel like nowadays police officers just don't de-escalate at all. They almost escalate situations.
It's very unfortunate.
Where they come in hot, like ready to be feisty, and it's like, so here is a great question. What if the person threatening your life is wearing a badge? Where you need to have self-defense against a police officer or another public official?
That's an excellent question.
So in Tennessee versus Garner, 1985, Supreme Court ruled the police cannot use deadly force against fleeing subjects who do not pose an imminent threat. In Graham versus Connor, the court introduced the objective reasonableness standard to evaluate police use of force.
So the both excellent Supreme Court cases, to go back to Tennessee versus Garner really quickly. So the Supreme Court ruled that the use of deadly force to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect is unconstitutional to the Fourth Amendment unless if that person poses an imminent safety risk to the officer or other people, something like that. The most recent example that I can think of with this was in Atlanta, Georgia. I feel like it was like either 2019 or 2021, and it was in a Wendy's drive-thru, and the police show up to have a conversation with somebody who's passed out behind the wheel in the Wendy's drive-thru. So most likely that person was intoxicated. It was the middle of the night, so probably. But the person winds up getting out of the car. They're having an altercation with the police, and then the person winds up taking off. And an officer opens fire and winds up murdering the person, who was at that point no longer sleeping in their car. And I remember this case so clearly, and it's like, so when I shoot someone in the back, how can I actually claim self-defense? Like, I think that it's a reasonable question.
Yeah, if they're running away from you,
right,
not running towards you,
right.
Yeah.
So
then I think tables,
100%.
The tables would switch them from aggressor to
defender. Yeah. And I'm not saying that what this person did in Atlanta was correct or incorrect. I'm just saying that that's absolutely not an appropriate use of deadly force. And the fact that that person's wearing a badge, that doesn't actually give them the right to take someone else's life. Dick,
Yeah.
it just, and I think any other reasonable person would draw this conclusion.
But then also, like, falling asleep in a Wendy's drive-through, like, where's the purpose of like that? Like, who is the victim?
Yeah.
Like,
That's
what
another
is
good
the
question.
point if there is no victim? So, do you think that person honestly needed to die because there was no victim and there was no actual crime? No, that seems not right. So,
And as a police officer, so because I do believe that there was a scuffle prior to this point, but I would, again, the officer was the instigator in the situation, and not stating what this person did and falling asleep was a good idea. But at the end of the day, just like what Stephanie said, is there is no corpus delicti. So if there's no injured party, then how is there a crime here? Which then begs the question of, like, okay, let's just solve the problem. Let's just go ahead and get this person awake. Let's get them, wherever they need to go. Maybe we don't actually need to escalate every situation to a deadly force situation just because somebody has that ability.
or like wake them up, see what's going on. If they're, they are drunk or if they're on drugs, cool.
Okay.
Let's get you in our car. We'll take you to the drunk tank. We'll let you
Sleep it
sober
off.
up and figure out life from there. But
Yeah.
like to shoot somebody is so fine.
Yeah. It's a lot to say there. So kind of come back to Graham versus Connors, landmark 1988 case. You got to establish objective of reasonableness when evaluating crimes of reasonable force by officers. This means that the use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, considering the totality of the circumstances. So again, this is a great point. And I think the biggest question here is, does a person get special rights or special privileges for wearing a badge? And my answer is no. Stephanie, what's your answer?
No.
Okay. So that's where it's always confusing for the public when you see officers murder people and they get like 4 years in prison. Where if we, any other, person were to go after a police officer, we're most likely facing the death penalty. And it's been very confusing to me how we can see these instances over and over, and we just say, "Oh, well, it was a cop." Okay, that's fine that it was a cop that did it, but like, was there a justifiable reason to take lethal action?
Right.
I don't know. We have to then get into specifics, but at the end of the day, I'm going to say that this person is not awarded without awarded the same thing. I personally feel it beyond just the standpoint of like when it comes to like rights violations. I think if you're like wrongfully arrested, that the police officer should face kidnapping charges. If you are, if the DA, the attorney cannot bring a case against you and you've been arrested, that the police officer who arrested you should face kidnapping charges. Period.
Yeah.
You can't just take me away because of your feelings. You can't just shoot me because you have a gun and a badge. Like that's not the way it works.
This is still the land of the free, and people still have rights. Unfortunately, they just don't think that you're gonna follow through with the other half of that. Where it's like, I feel like to really do the harm, you have to get into a courtroom and have somebody, judge over this. And there's ways to set public officials, police officers, and such like that straight in courtrooms, but you have to position yourself for that. And it takes so much. When you're on the side of the road and a police officer comes up and punches you for no reason, you're like, okay, cool, I'm gonna take one on the chin and wait for the courtroom. Like,
yay, thank goodness.
Yeah, that's a little hard to eat. Just like, okay, I'm gonna be mistreated or whatever the situation is, and you're just like, okay, I have to wait till court. Yeah. So it's like, how do you defend yourself even against a police officer that's taking his authority too far,
Well, and the other thing that's very interesting about all this stuff is look very much from the perspective of from the police officer. Like if you look at Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor, it's solely from the perspective of the officer. Case that we're not going to look at too much today, but is very relevant, is a case called Plummer versus State. This was an 1893 case that very specifically states that all citizens, state citizens, we have the right to defend ourselves from law enforcement up to and including taking the officer's life. It's just that cut and dry. It's that clean and clear. I'm not saying go out and fight a cop. Okay, please don't do that. But it comes down to what is the right to self-defense. And even the United States Supreme Court was able to look through all of our biases and say, yeah, we should have law and order and we should have law enforcement. But if we're enforcing, if that person, that individual, that cop is taking that on themselves and enforcing something that's not actually law, that's not actually constitutional, you should have the ability to defend yourself. And then if it becomes a situation where we're not talking about just running away, just escaping, like if we're talking guns are drawn and, shots have been fired, I should have the ability to defend myself up to and including taking the officer's life. This person is making a choice. They're choosing to be uneducated. They're choosing to not understand the law, and they're choosing to try and enforce something that's not actually within their authority to do so. The gun and badge, nothing at that point. It'd be like your grandma trying to control what you could do inside of your house. Nope. Sorry, can't do it.
Yeah, especially since they work for the United States of America. And that's a whole nother jurisdictional issue.
Right.
But technically they're foreigners, and foreigners you can't just be, somebody from South Africa can't just come to your house and kick down your door because they want to.
Right. It doesn't work like that.
No.
So before we move on to the next section, I do want to share with everybody that there are 14 states that it is completely illegal to resist arrest, even if the arrest is unlawful. Now, this would be a state issue. It's Arkansas, Colorado, Connecticut, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Missouri, Montana. Got a lot of M states. That got Michigan, we're not there. New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, Tennessee, and Texas. I think this really brings up the same issue where the state courts are trying to say that they can supersede the United States Constitution, and I think we all know that they can't. I mean, they
even
can,
the Supreme Court, they can't
yeah,
overrule the
right.
case.
Yeah, it's
That's
fine that
crazy.
you believe that. Like, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but that brings up the same issue that we've been talking about. So if I'm just driving through New Jersey, if I'm just traveling through New Jersey and some flatfoot decides that he's going to escalate a situation and I'm just supposed to take it, like there's nothing I can do. It seems ridiculous. It really does. All right. So let's take this a little bit further when you're talking about permits and licensings for self-defense. So the Second Amendment very clearly states that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Seems fairly cut and dry. Yet today, in many states, you must apply for a permit, pay a fee, and submit to background checks in order to actually exercise these rights. So there's a couple of big issues there. These are some cases we've talked about in other episodes, but I want to bring them up again. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, and Shuttlesworth versus the city of Birmingham. So both of these come into play for their own unique reasons. So let me get this pulled up real quick. Let's take a look at Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. And what the state Supreme Court ruled that city ordinances requiring religious people to pay a license tax was unconstitutional. So you can't say that one right is a right and another right is like subjective. You know what I mean? The right to free speech is sometimes subjective, and then sometimes the right to not quarter soldiers is subjective. No, they're rights all the time. The same thing with the Second Amendment. And your city ordinances and your state laws and your municipality codes, none of that is really relevant. It's really not. Everyone's allowed to think it is, but it's not. So the point of all this is that when we start talking about this and people are like, well, yeah, I have to get my hunting license. Well, what do you mean you have to go get a hunting license? Murdoch versus Pennsylvania very clearly states you don't have to. Okay. I mean, you can go get a hunting license if you want to, but you don't have to. And then the other case, so just one second, let me get that pulled up, which was Shuttlesworth versus the city of Birmingham, Alabama. Address the issue whether a city ordinance requiring permits was constitutional. The court ruled that a law requiring a license or a permit for an activity is like a constitutional right. You can't actually ask for that. So you just simply can't ask for that. And then I have an as that is an unconstitutional ordinance, I am allowed to continue doing this without impunity. And what that just means is I can continue to do it.
That's big stuff, because when the DNR rolls up on you and you're out there and you're fishing or you're hunting or you're on your boat and you have a line in the water and they see you and they're like, cool, where's your license? Can I see it? Like, oh crap, I'm gonna get a fine. This says otherwise. That's sauce right there in my opinion.
Yeah. It's pretty big.
Yeah.
It's pretty big. And then one more case too, and we have talked about this one as well, is Marbury versus Madison, 1803, that all laws that are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. So we became an organic constitution in 1789. And by 1803, we were already seeing massive constitutional challenges. And I think that when you're talking about as a nation and as a society, as any civilized society that wants to operate under a constitution, you have to take this into account. If a law is created and that law is unconstitutional, we must simply void it. Because we've all decided that we're going to live by a constitution. It's not just America, actually. It's like over 100 different nations are sovereign nations. They have their own constitutions. So it's most of the world does this. So then we can't just say, oh, well, I guess today this right is going to be a right, and I guess tomorrow you're going to go ahead and have to pay every time you want to use, like, post something online. Like, you have to pay. Could you imagine paying the government to post your news articles online? How would you feel about that? Does that sound like freedom of the press, or does it sound like oppression?
Will you pay for that?
Well, you buy internet service, or you might pay the Detroit Free Press.
Into a newspaper, you have to pay for that.
So that's that press. So that's that. So you're paying that paper. You're not paying the government.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's really where, to be clear on this issue, the enforcement of licensing laws is in and of itself unconstitutional. So every time the DNR writes you a ticket for not having a hunting license, any right, your right to travel being abridged on, your right to bear arms being abridged on, all of these things are much bigger issues than we want to say. But you can just
right, and don't be so caught up in life or be too busy to not stand up for your rights or your child's rights or your neighbor's rights when you can. Right? Don't just be compliant, because honestly, that's what they expect from you. That's how they run their system. So I'm not saying don't comply, be combative, but I'm saying
stand up and defend yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's tons of different ways that you can stand up and defend yourself through more than just fists and
knives, bullets, and stuff like that. Man.
Absolutely. You can honestly just stand up and say, hey, that's not right. And that's a way of saying your rights too.
Yeah.
Hey, you're trampling my rights. When you state the truth for the record, then they can't go off of assumptions, which is the other one they run their system off of, assumptions. And so you state the record clearly, and now it's like, okay, now there is no assumptions. I'm this person, I have these rights, I'm standing on them. You can go pound sand. So, yeah. So we have another topic, which is self-defense against animals. Everyone, just like we just talked about before, with there being several different ways other than guns and knives and things like that. There's more self-defense. This is really an interesting topic because technically some states really do require you to have a permit to have a gun on you to go like walking on a trail or
Yeah, like national forest or public land or stuff like that, where
right.
your rent should be, there anyways.
And then if the animal is protected, then if you shoot that animal without great cause, then you're also in the hot seat. So, Yellowstone, you shoot a bear, you shoot a wolf. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a big deal, right? You shoot a bald eagle, now you're really in trouble, right? So it's like, well, what did this bald eagle do for you to kill it? How is it threatening your life?
Absolutely.
And you better like have it measurements of like, how far away it was from you, when you shot it, when you stabbed it, whatever it was. And you better have your sword straight on animals. It's actually law on that is pretty strict and crazy. You can get alone in a lot of trouble.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned Yellowstone because there's in that show, which is a fantastic show, by the way. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. Rip has to do that. He has to kill a bear, and it becomes a massive issue. And I think about that situation, and it's like, man, if I'm face down with an 800-pound grizzly bear and that thing is charging at me, whoo, buddy, I'm just so happy that I have a gun at that point.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm not happy that I have to take this animal's life, but I'm like, okay, this is survival of the fittest, man.
Oh, I know when those Asians completely just jump off that cliff and that scene. That's a crazy episode of Yellowstone.
Again, watch the show. Sorry if we ruined that scene for you guys, but if you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it.
Also, a really good episode of Yellowstone is the wolves.
Yeah.
They have an episode where they accidentally killed 2 wolves. They grab the collars off, they put it on water to try and make it so it looks like they're floating down the river. But yeah,
very interesting.
A very good show.
So let's talk about some bigger picture things here. So this is definitely a legal issue, but it's also a moral and philosophical issue. So you cannot separate and apply the Constitution differently. You can't demand licenses for some rights and then for others, they're just protected. I just don't think that actually makes a lot of sense. I think any other reasonable person would agree with me as well. The founders didn't fight a revolution so that generations could ask their governor for permissions for defending their own lives. I think that statement really, really speaks true because I hear this so often from people. Like I'll give you this example. So I was having a conversation the other day with a gentleman, and he was talking about, well, if you ever have a situation with a cop is going to tell you twice, and then after that, the cop is going to break your window, and then after they break your window, they're going to put you in handcuffs. And I literally just went, can we stop normalizing rights violations? Like I literally just stopped him. I said, can we just stop normalizing rights violations? Because I don't care if a cop tells me something. That's great. You've told me something. There has to be a crime for you to have authority in the first place. And if you're going to try and make the argument that a victimless crime is somehow going to justify you destroying my property and kidnapping me, we have 2 very different definitions of what society is supposed to be.
Yeah, and then can the state be a victim when they're the ones hiring judges and the cops in the first place?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question.
Sounds like a conflict of interest to me.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. So we looked up some stuff for Michigan. I'm not going to be sharing this on the screen, and Stephanie won't be sharing this on the screen, but we looked up some very interesting things that are specifically for Michigan laws regarding permits when it comes to hunting and fishing and camping and stuff like this. So just a quick brief overview of this stuff. So camping in the state of Michigan, you're allowed to open carry. Concealed carry would require a CPL. This is interesting. So transporting your firearms in your vehicle in the state of Michigan without a CPL, that firearm is supposed to be unloaded in a closed case and inaccessible from passengers. Kind of is a rights violation right there. Like literally just simply a rights violation. Because I don't know about you, but if I keep my bullets separate from my gun, that's a long time typically to load the firearm before I'm able to use it. And most times life and death doesn't happen over 25 seconds. It's usually happening right now. So for hunting license is required. Pistols only must be carried openly if no CPL. If you have concealed carry, that's a little bit different. Non-residents must have a CPL from their own state, but Michigan does not honor out-of-state CPLs. So that's kind of a very interesting situation as well. Again, all of this to me is a rights violation. So I just want you to know that I am not normalizing this, and these are rights violations, and this is ridiculous, everything I'm reading.
Yeah, because if you have the right to bear arms, then I should be able to go from state to state to state.
Yeah, none of that.
And I have to get Michigan, Indiana, Illinois,
Yeah,
Kansas,
right.
Nebraska. Like, I shouldn't have to get all of those just to go across the country.
And at the end of the day, if I wanted to get a CPL, that would mean that I've gone through the safety courses. And last time I checked, the requirements are that much different from New York to say Oregon for a standpoint of CPL. You're going through the same safety courses, and I promise you they're not that much different. An AR-15 is an AR-15, whether you're in Jamaica or whether you're in New York City, my man. So for fishing, you would have, there's no firearms permit required for fishing. You can open carry or concealed carry with a CPL. Transporting rules. So this is where I personally feel we're getting into the most rights violations when it comes to state laws. So transporting rules without a CPL. Firearm must be unloaded in a locked or zipper case, stored separately from ammunition, and not readily accessible inside the vehicle. Holy crap, Mr. or Mrs. Robert, and/or life-threatening situation. Give me about 5 minutes to get my stuff together. Study 5. That's all I need. CPL is required for concealed carry anywhere outside. Long guns are different from that, so you can legally have those without a permit. Again, it's not the same thing. It's pretty hard to like hide a long rifle. They're like 3 or 4 feet. So yeah. All righty, guys. So I just want to go ahead and leave this episode and talk about we should know our rights. We should be questioning authority, and never forget a right that can be taken, taxed, or licensed is not a right at all. So I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in to Things We Don't Talk About. I'm Mark Daniel Masney.
I'm Stephanie.
We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.